Rabbi Rothman invited me to come speak, and the truth of the matter is that I've always learned that Tisha B'Av isn't a day for grand speeches and for deep shiurim. Tisha B'Av is not supposed to be. You're not supposed to experience the joy, the real joy of studying Torah. It almost seems like the main goal of learning even those sections that deal with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is more, this at least will keep your mind on the Churban, will keep your mind on the destruction rather than on what you're eating that night or some random conversation. So, I said to him that what I could do is go through the Gemara in Gitten, which is the classic passage that deals with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of various Jewish communities, and links it to various psukim and anchors it in Torah. So I said, we can go through that. I'm not planning on anything terribly deep. If at some point someone has to leave, I will not be offended in the least. We booked it at an hour and a half. Frankly, you can sit here and you can see by the thickness of the packets, you could do this Gemara all day long. But we'll go as the pace takes us. If anyone wants to interrupt with questions, that's fine. Comments, insights, that's also fine. There are some copies of the Gemara around. There are not that many, but there are some here and there.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, sure. If you start, it's on the bottom of Nun Hey Amud Beis 55b. I see that he Xeroxed 55a. You don't need 55a for this today. We're on 55b, Nun Hey Amud Beis, and it starts 8 lines up from the bottom. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. You see the 2 dots there. It was already pressed. Yeah, it's on. Thanks. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan starts off the discussion. The Gemara was not talking about Tisha B'Av at all. The Gemara was talking about a phenomenon called sikrikon, in which land was taken. Basically, Jews would own land, and someone would come along and say, "I'm going to kill you," and the Jew would say, "Okay, take my land as ransom for my life." And unfortunately, this was a common enough occurrence that the Mishnah had to discuss what happens now if a Jew buys such land off of some Roman who had himself gotten it by forcing a Jew to turn it over. Now, whose land is it? That's the morbid context into which this discussion is entered. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan quotes a pasuk from Mishlei. Mai dichsiv. What does it mean when the pasuk says, "Ashrei adam mefached tamid umakshe libo yipol bara'ah"? Fortunate is somebody who is always afraid. The pasuk in Mishlei in Proverbs says, "Umakshe libo," and someone who hardens his heart, yipol bara'ah, will fall into evil. So when we are told this in Mishlei, when we are told you're fortunate if you're always afraid, what's that about? What's the focus there? So the Rabbi Yochanan's answer is to link it to events that surround the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash and follow thereafter. He says, "Kamsa ubar Kamsa charav Yerushalayim." Because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Yerushalayim was destroyed. Atarnagola v'tarnagolta charav Turmalka. Because of a rooster and a chicken, Turmalka was destroyed. And Ashaka derispak charav Beitar. And because of the door or the axle of a wagon, Beitar was destroyed. These 3 stories he ties back to this fortunate is somebody who's always afraid. And the Gemara now, for the next really 2 daf, until the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, is going to discuss these 3 stories. The Mefarshim, the commentators, hasten to note that we don't mean to say that Shlomo HaMelech writes this pasuk, creates this pasuk in Mishlei, and the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, the Great Assembly in the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, actually canonize it in Mishlei, thinking about the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. But the theme that's in this pasuk, the theme of a person should always be afraid about what's going to happen, about the potential results of his actions, that theme is seen in the events that surround the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. That comes up several times in the Gemara in various places, where the Gemara will quote a sentence that appears in Tanakh in reference to events that occur far later on in history. So Rabbi Yochanan says that's the idea here in this sentence, and specifically one should always be afraid. Tosfos here asks that the Gemara in Brachos says that if you see somebody who always is afraid, you should be concerned this person is a sinner. And the reason he's afraid is because he's afraid that he's going to get zapped for something that he's done wrong. So how do I reconcile that idea with this Gemara, which seems to say you should always be afraid? So Tosfos' resolution is that there are different types of fear. And the fear that we are praising here is the fear of somebody who says, if I act in a certain way, if I sin, if I do something harmful, what's going to be the result? If you think of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, that someone should be roa as hanolad, one should always see that which is going to happen. He should predict that which is going to happen from his behavior. They shouldn't simply act in a vacuum and think that everything is going to be all right. That's what we're talking about in this context, and that's what we see in these three stories. The first story is the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Now, you've probably heard of this story in the past and are basically familiar with its details, but the thing that's always striking about this story is that Kamsa isn't in it. There is no Kamsa in this story. It's a story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, a person by the name of Kamsa and a person by the name of Bar Kamsa, but no Kamsas were injured in the presentation of this story at all. There is no Kamsa involved. So what do you mean? Because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Yerushalayim was destroyed. So I think Pashup Pshat, the simple read of the Gemara, is that the point is not Kamsa and the Bar Kamsa. The point is that because of this slight difference between the name Kamsa and the name Bar Kamsa, as you'll see in the story, Yerushalayim ends up being destroyed. And the point of the Gemara is, even for little details like that, great devastation can take place. There are all sorts of other layers of meaning that people assign to it, but I think that's the simple read of the story in the Gemara, and you'll see as we read the story. Kamsa ubar Kamsa charav Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Tehu Gavra derachme Kamsa ubal devave Bar Kamsa, because there was a man whose friend was Kamsa and whose enemy was Bar Kamsa. Avad, and as a matter of fact, some people stop the story right there and say that's why you had the destruction of Yerushalayim. The fact that you could have a friend and you could have an enemy. Automatically, that's already a problem. Jews should not have enemies. We should only have friends. I think it's the Maharsha who suggests Bar, usually in Aramaic, means son of. So they suggest that it was actually a feud in which he was friends with Kamsa, but he couldn't stand Kamsa's son, Bar Kamsa, which aggravates the whole thing. But Avad Seudasa, this man who is unknown to us, we don't know his name at all. He doesn't deserve to be recorded for posterity, as you'll see. Avad Seudasa, he made a feast. Amar le l'sham zil aisili Kamsa. He says to his servant, invite Kamsa to my feast. Kamsa's my friend. Azal aisile bar Kamsa. But the servant makes a mistake. We assume it's an error, and he invites Bar Kamsa. Asa ashkache dava Yosef. So the host comes along and sees him sitting there at the meal. Amarle michtiahu gavra bal devava dahu gavrahu. He says, what are you doing here? You're my enemy. What are you doing at my feast? I once heard somebody suggest the way he speaks here is in the third person. He says, this man is the enemy of this man. But the truth of the matter is that I don't think you should read too much into that, because in the Gemara it's frequently presented that way. People will speak, in fact, in the third person in a story, so I wouldn't read too much into it. But he says, you're my enemy. My boys hacha, what do you want here at my party? Kumpok, get up and leave. Omarle, so Bar Kamsa is sitting there at this meal where everybody is around, and if you look at the version in Medrash Rabbah, as we will in a few minutes, you see it's even stronger than that, but he's sitting at this meal, and he says, Holva asoi, Shavka, and he says, since I've already come to the meal, I thought you wanted me here, Shavka, let me be, and I'll pay you for whatever I eat and drink. So it won't cost you anything to have me at your meal. We're on the top of Nun Vav at Aleph now, 56a. Amar le, he said, no, I don't want you at my meal. Amar le, yahiv nalach me palga de seudasech. He said, listen, I'll pay you for half of your feast. No one's going to know, right? I'm going to have paid for half of the meal. You made this great meal. You invited the whole town, all the aristocrats, and you'll get all the credit, and I'll have paid for 50% of the meal. Amar le lo, he says, no. He says, listen, I'll pay for the whole feast. You will get all the credit, all the thousands of dollars that you paid for, you shelled out for Kiddush, for everything. I'm going to pay for all of it. Just let me stay at the meal. Don't embarrass me. Amar Leilo, no. Nakte biyadei va'ok me va'afke. He takes him by the hand, he picks him up, and he throws him out. Now, what's most striking to me in this story is the contrast between what he did now and what he did when he invited his friend. How did he invite his friend? Right. He told the servant, go get me my friend Kamsa to come to the party. But when it came to kicking somebody out, that he does himself. Right? This is that he's going to do on his own. It's the opposite of when they talk about Bilam and they talk about Abraham and saddling the donkey. Right? At the Akedah, so Avram saddles the donkey himself. It's not that he has no one to turn to saddle the donkey, but Avram, out of his love for the mitzvah, wants to do it himself. And then Bilam, the opposite end of things, but the same concept, when he wants to go attack the Jews, so he saddles up the donkey himself. He doesn't turn to anybody else. He's going to do it himself. This fellow here, when it came to inviting someone to the party, that he could outsource. That he's going to assign to somebody else. Kicking someone out of the party, kicking his enemy out, I'm going to show him that he does himself. That's it's achzarius, it's simple cruelty. Omar. So Bar Kamsa says, Hoel babu yasper rabbanan v'lo machu bei, shmami na kanei chalahu. The rabbanan were sitting here, they didn't protest. This must be okay with them. This kind of conduct, throwing me out in front of everybody, that must be good to them. Ezel echel b'hur kurza bei malka. I am going to tell Lashon Hara about them to the king. Echol kurza is an Aramaic phrase for Lashon Hara. You see it in Sefer Daniel. He says, I'm going to go say bad things about them to the king. Azal Amar le Kesar Mardu Bach Yehudai. He goes and tells the Roman leadership, the Jews are rebelling against you. Amar le Miyemar. They said, who says? Amar lo, he said to them, listen, Shadar lehu korbana, send a korban to them. Chazes ime karban le, and see if they bring it as a korban or not. Azal shadar biyade egla tilsa. So they sent with Bar Kamsa a korban. Egla tilsa literally is a third calf. But what does that mean when you say it's a third calf? So Tosfos offers a few different suggestions. This is a phrase that we see in the Gemara in various places, this term tilsa, to suggest that it's something particularly good. It's not just a regular thing, but it's something fine. And Tosfos suggests that it simply could mean bari vito, very healthy and good. Some suggest it's a third-born calf, but Tosfos rejects that idea. Some suggest that it's 1/3 grown. The point is, this is a very fine animal. Bahade de Kaasi, the Maharsha has added levels on this, but I'm skipping that for now. Bahade de Kaasi, when Bar Kamsa was coming to Yerushalayim with this korban, Shada be'muma beniv spasayim, he put a blemish in the lips of the animal. Va'amri la bedokin shaba'ayin, or some say that it was in the eye. In the white of the eye, he puts a blemish in the animal in some fine point, not a huge point. The point was duchta deladidan havamuma or lididahu lav mumahu, something that would be a blemish as far as our laws of karbanos, but generally speaking would not be viewed as a blemish by the nation. So in other words, if a Roman were to look at it, he would say this animal's a great animal. But the Jews are going to look at it and say, it's a balmum, it's blemished, we can't bring it. And the idea is that the Jews then cannot bring this korban in the Beis HaMikdash, and that will be a sign to the Romans. They didn't accept our gift. That's a sign that they don't accept our authority either. That's the idea. The commentators note on this, the blemish is in the lip and in the eye. The lip for the fact that they didn't speak up in order to save him, and the eye is tsarus ayin, his stinginess. He wouldn't let me even eat at his meal, and there are variations on this explanation that you see in various commentaries. But the idea is that lips and eyes are not an accident here in this account in the Gemara. So we're on the first wide line. Savu Rabbanan lekarove mishum shlo malchus. The Rabbanan wanted to bring it. They said, you know what? You're right. It's blemished, but the Romans are going to kill us if we don't bring this. So let's bring it. Amar Luhu Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas speaks up and he says, Yomru bale mumin kraven legabe mizbeach. If you do that, people will think you can bring a blemished animal on the mizbeach. Sabr lemiktalei lolezov alema. So they came up with a plan B. Let's kill Bar Kamsa, so that he can't go tell the king we didn't bring the carbon. How's he going to know what went on in the Beis HaMikdash? Amar lohu Rabbi Zechariah. Rabbi Zechariah speaks up again, and he says, Yomru matil mum bekachim yehareg. People are going to say that somebody who blemishes a carbon gets killed. Can't have that. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, An visanuso Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus hechriva es beisenu v'sarfa es hechalenu v'higlisanu me'artzenu. Rabbi Yochanan said, Anvisanusa, which I will translate for the moment as humility, of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus, destroyed our house, burned our temple, and exiled us from our land, because as you'll see, that's where this story is going to go when the Romans get wind of the fact that we wouldn't bring the carbon. So the question is, and the classic question is, what is the humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus? So some suggest that the humility here is actually not humility. Rashi translates it here as savlanus, as patience. His patience, meaning he wasn't willing to act, he wasn't willing to do. He was going to say, let's see what happens, and that's one approach. Others suggest it's because he didn't have the hubris to get up and make a new decree that in this case it's haras shah, it's a case of need, we're going to do things differently. We're going to bring this blemished animal, or we're going to kill him. He didn't have the nerve to say that. He was too humble. He said, we can't do anything that's different, and let the chips fall where they may. And so that's another explanation of how this was his humility. However, the most scathing read, I think, is the most accurate read, and that is found in the version of this story that appears in Medrash Rabbah. Let me tell you the story as it shows in Medrash Rabbah. It's in Parsha Dalet, it's Medrash Gimel. Once there was a story about a certain man in Yerushalayim who made a meal. Once again, the host is anonymous. We don't want to know who he is. Amar leben Beso, lech v'haveli Kamsa rachmi. He said, go bring me my friend Kamsa, and Azal ba'aisi le Bar Kamsa son. He brought him his enemy Bar Kamsa. And the same story. All the yashav bein ha'orchim, he goes to sit among the guests. All ashkeche beinei aristia. And the host found him among these guests who had been invited to the party. The Aristia question of what Aristia is about is a good question, but I'm not going to go there right now. But he says to him, get out of my house. And he says, don't embarrass me, and I'll pay you for your meal. And he says, doesn't matter, I don't want you here. But then, Amar le kum lech, he said, get up and go. V'haya sham Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus. That's the added sentence in Medrash Rabbah. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus was present at the party, and he had the chance to protest, and he didn't protest. And that's the indictment of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus for his humility. At the party, he said, well, who am I to speak up? Who am I to say anything? I can't intervene. And then, when they're debating what to do, halachically, about the animal that's been sent, now he's speaking up, and now he's saying, this is what we can do, and this is what we can't do. And so the indictment that Rabbi Yochanan delivers is, how could you be so humble at the party not to speak up, and now you're speaking up, and that's the problem when we see things going on, and we don't say anything. So this is what happens next. Shadari Lavayu Niron Caesar. The Romans send the Neron, who is a general, even though he's called Neron Caesar. The Maram Shif comments here that it can't be Caesar. He's not. This is not the famous Caesar Nero. This is a general by the name of Nero. Kika asi shada gira lemizrach asa nafal b'Yerushalayim. When he was traveling to Yerushalayim, he shot an arrow up in the air to the east, and it fell in Yerushalayim. Lemarav asa nafal b'Yerushalayim. He shot to the west, and again it fell in Yerushalayim. He's trying to get an omen. He wants to see, is he really supposed to invade? So he shoots arrows in opposite directions, and it falls in Yerushalayim. La'arba ruchos hashamayim. He sends arrows in 4 different directions. Asa nafal b'Yerushalayim. It keeps falling in Yerushalayim. Amar Leili Yanuka, he said to a child, Psokli Psukech, tell me what sentence you are reading right now. Amar Le, he quotes it from Yechezkel, V'nasatias nikmasi be'edom b'yad ami Yisrael. I am going to put my vengeance in Edom in the hands of my nation Israel. So he understands what's going on. Amar kudsha brichu boy lecharuve beise, or nechale lecharuve beise. He says it's all right for God to destroy his house. God has planned that his house is going to be destroyed. Uboy lechapura yade be'u gavra, but he's going to want to wipe his hands on that man, meaning me. In other words, I am going to be God's tool to destroy things, and then afterwards God's going to punish me for having carried out the destruction. I want nothing to do with this. Arak ve'ezel ve'igayer. He ran away and he converted. V'nafak minei Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir emerged in the end from his descendants. One wonders who was on the Beis Din that converted Nero. Not Emperor Nero, but still. Nonetheless, Shadra ilavayu la'aspasianus Caesar. They next send Vespasian. Asa tsar Allah tlas shani. Well, Vespasian lays siege for 3 years to Yerushalayim. Havu bahanu tlasa asiri. And there were 3 wealthy men in Yerushalayim. You may recognize their names from elsewhere in the Gemara. Nakdimon ben Gurion. We're going to explain his name in a few minutes. But Nakdimon ben Gurion was one. Uben Kalva Savua is the second one. You remember him as?
Father-in-law of Rabbi
Right, father-in-law of Rabbi Akiva. Uben Tzitzis Hakeses. And we're going to explain him in a moment. Nakdimon ben Gurion shenakta lochama ba'avuro. Nakdimon ben Gurion, for whom the sun stopped. He was involved in that story where there was a time of a drought, and if the wells were not filled by a certain time, he was going to be in trouble. And then sunset is coming, and the wells are still not filled, and the rain still hasn't come. And then suddenly the sun seems to stop. Apparently, the sun stops, and the rains suddenly come, and the wells are filled. That was the story involving Nakdimon ben Gurion. Ben Kalba Savua. How did he get the name Kalba Savua? So it's a nickname. Kalba Savua is a full dog. And the idea was that anybody who entered his house hungry as a dog would emerge full. It's a striking name because we usually don't like to refer to people in the language of dogs. The Gemara talks about that specifically, that a person who refers to himself as tired as a dog, it says something about his personality and he lacks refinement. But apparently this was the phrase that was used, that you could go into his house that hungry and you would leave full. He would always feed you. And Ben Tzitzis HaKeses, Shaisa Tzitziso Nigreres Agabe Ksasos or Karamuksasos, that his tzitzis dragged on cushions. What does that mean? Ikeda Amri Shaisa Ksasa Mutelas Ben Gedole Romi. Some explained that his cushion was found among the aristocrats of Rome. So, you would sit down, they didn't have chairs like we have, but they would have these cushions that they would recline on. So his cushions were among the aristocrats of Rome. And so that's one explanation. Alternatively, it's simply that when he walked, he always walked on cushions, and therefore his tzitzis trailed over cushions. Chad Amar Lahu, Ana Zaina Lahu Bechiti Visari. Well, one of these 3 wealthy people said, I can provide wheat and barley for everybody in Yerushalayim. V'chad Amar Lahu B'dechamro B'demilcho Mishcha. The second one said, I can provide wine and salt and oil. V'chad Amar Lahu B'detzivi. And one said, I can provide wood. Vishabchu Rabbanan L'detzivi, and the Rabbanan particularly praised the one who said he could offer the wood. The Rav Chisda Kolaklidi Avamasya L'Shamei Bar Midetzivi. As a matter of fact, Rav Chisda would entrust all of his keys to his servant, except for the keys for the storehouse of wood. It was that hard to get wood, and you think about it in Yerushalayim, you certainly understand why. The Amar Rav Chisda Akalba Dechiti Boishis and Akalba Detzivi. But Rav Chisda's point was that if you have a storehouse of wheat, you need 60 storehouses of wood in order to be able to actually bake the wheat into anything. In other words, you're going to make bread, you need a fire in order to be able to do the baking. So I require 60 times the amount of wheat in order to be able to bake it. So the 3 of them, between them, are all going to take care of the needs of Yerushalayim. They had sufficient means to provide for 21 years. However, there were some biryonim in there. The biryonim are generally assumed to have been wild people who did not listen to the Chachamim, and particularly they wanted to fight against the Romans. They felt we should not be trying to appease them or trying to wait them out. We should go out to battle. Amr lahu Rabbanan, Nepok v'navet shlama ba'adayu. The Rabbanan said to them, let's go make peace with the Romans. Lo shavkinu. But the Biryonim would not allow it. Absolutely not. No one's leaving. Amr lahu Nepok v'navet krava ba'adayu. The Biryonim said, we think we should go out and do battle. Amr lo Rabbanan lo mistaya milsa. The Rabbanan said, it's not going to work. We don't simply say that we should go to war every time against the enemy. It's not necessarily the right move. Kamu kalinu lahanu amivri dechiti v'sari v'avachafna. Well, the Biryonim resolved matters. They burned the storehouse of wheat and barley, and at that point there was a famine. Because however good your wood is, if you have nothing to cook, you're not going to survive. And now we get a story that illustrates the depth of the famine. Marta bas Baisus atirta di Yerushalayim havya. Marta bas Baisus was the wealthy woman of Yerushalayim. Marta bas Baisus is a common name in the Gemara. We find elsewhere the story of Marta bas Baisus, who was married to Yoshua ben Gamla and who bought the Kahuna Gedola for him. But it's not the same Marta bas Baisus as the commentaries note. It doesn't work in terms of when the other one lived. But when you think about it for a minute, you realize why. Marta is the Aramaic feminine equivalent of Mar. Mar is the masculine, Marta is the feminine. Mar means... Sorry? Not Mar like that in the Hebrew, you're right. But Mar in Aramaic is Sir. It's Sir. It's a reference to it's a title. So Mar for man, Marta, or Marat, for a woman. The Marta simply means she was a matron, and she was from the house of Baitus, the Bothusians, which was a wealthy house in Yerushalayim. So you find more than one woman referred to in the Gemara as Marta bas Baisus, because it just means a matron from the family of Bothus. That's what this is. So Marta bas Baisus was the wealthy woman, or a wealthy woman in Yerushalayim. Shadarta l'shlucha, she sent out her proxy, va'amrale, and she said to him, Zil aisi li smida, go out and bring for me smida. Smida is fine flour. Ada'azal izdaban, by the time he gets there, it's sold out. Asa amarla smida leka chivarta ika, so he came back and he told her, there is no smida, however there is chivarta, white flour. It's still a little bit refined. Amrale, zilai sili. So she said, no, bring that. Ada'azal izdaban, he goes out, it's sold out. Asaba Amarla, he comes back and he tells her, Chivarta leka, there is no white flour anymore. Gushkara ika, there's coarse flour. That there is. So it's like a bran. The Amarla, Zil Amrale, she says, zilai sili, so she said, go bring that. Ada'azal izdaban. By the time he went to the market, that was sold out as well. Asava Amarla came back and he said to her, Gushkara leka, there is no gushkara anymore, there is no coarse flour anymore. Kimcha desari ika, there's barley flour. So Amarla zil aisili, so she said to him, go out and bring it for me. Da'azal izdaban. By the time he got there, it was sold out. We mentioned 4 different types of flour. I think it's the Maharsha who connects it to the 4 types of bread that they used in the Karban Tamid. In the Karban Toda, I should say. You had 40 loaves of bread. 4 types of bread were used, and so each one has a parallel among these. So by the time he gets there, that's all sold out as well. So of course you read this story and you think to yourself, what should the servant have done?
Buy whatever he picked up something.
Right, he should have picked up whatever he could.
Right.
So why didn't he? Why didn't he, the first time he went there and saw you didn't have the finest flour, why didn't he just say, well, I'm going to get her whatever I can get her?
Because that's not what she sent him for.
And therefore?
He wouldn't want to bring back what she didn't want.
Right, she wouldn't have approved, he wouldn't want to he doesn't want to cross her. That's one possibility, is that he's intimidated and he doesn't want to risk bringing back the wrong thing. That's certainly one possible read. Another possible read, though, that's consistent with what went on for the Jews in those days, as we see in this, and it goes back to the point about Ashrei Adam Efache Tamid, that one should always be afraid. He may have thought the market's hit bottom, so to speak. Yeah, now, okay, so they sold out the finest stuff, but I'm sure I'm going to come back, the next level is still going to be available. He doesn't realize the depth of what's going on. He doesn't realize that everything is gone and that you better grab what you can get at this point. There was this belief, and it's consistent with what we know about the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash as well, but we see it here in this story itself involving Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. There's a belief that whatever happens, ultimately the bottom isn't going to fall out. We're going to be okay. We're going to survive this fine. And so he figures, okay, I couldn't get her the best stuff. There's still lesser stuff. Let me check with her, and then I'll come back, and it's going to be there. And even though he comes back and it's sold out, he still thinks, things are going to be okay. I'll be able to get the third level, or I'll be able to get the fourth level. It doesn't dawn on him that it's all over, that nothing, the world that he knew is gone. It just absolutely does not dawn. He can't wrap his mind around that idea. It's like when you see when the stock market goes down, as happens on occasion, and someone's holding a stock, right, and the stock drops, and he says, "Well, should I sell? Maybe now it's hit the bottom, right?" And then he comes back the next day and he looks again, and should I sell now? Well, maybe this is the bottom. That's exactly what's going on with this servant. He can't wrap his mind around the idea that it's all over. So, Hava Shlifa Misana. This woman, Marta Baspaisis, is not wearing shoes. She would walk around on cushions. She never wore shoes. Amra Epok Ve'achze Imashkach Namidi Lamechol. So she said, I'm going to go out and see whether I can find anything to eat. Esiv La Parta Bekara Umesa. She stepped on Parta and she died. Parta, as Rashi says here, is peresh shagil lebehema. It's excrement from an animal. That's what she stepped on, and she died of shock. Kari Allah Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He quotes Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai quoted a pasuk from the Tochacha, the warning of punishment that appears in Sefer Devarim, in which we are told, the one who was soft and pampered among you, who had never had to test her foot upon the ground. So he says, see that? That's this woman. She never had to test her foot upon the ground. Ika de Amri, alternatively, Grogros to Rabbi Tzadok, Achla v'isnisa umesa. She tried to eat the dried figs of Rabbi Tzadok, and she died. What's the story with the dried figs? So they give you the short story here. There's more of it coming on the next page. The Rabbi Tzadok Yasiv Arbein Shnin B'Ta'anisa. Rabbi Tzadok fasted for 40 years. So the Lech of Yerushalayim, that Yerushalayim should not be destroyed. We don't know what that means. Does that mean he fasted during the day and he ate at night? Does it mean that he fasted certain days during the week? We just know that he observed 40 years of fasts, and he was so thin that when he ate anything, it was visible on the outside. You could see. And you think, unfortunately, I mean, it's horrific. I'm sure that Jews of 100 years ago read this Gemara and thought, can that be? Can someone be so malnourished? But when you read the accounts from when they liberated the camps, that's what you're talking about here. And when he was being made healthy, then Maisile Grogros, they brought him dried figs, and Mayitz Mayahu, he sucked out the liquid, Vishadilu, and he threw out the rest of the fig, because he couldn't digest the fig. So that was what she tried to eat, and it was just such a shock to her system. Kiava Kanecha Nafsha, when she was dying, she's out there in shock. Apikta Lachaldava Vakaspa, she took out all her gold and silver. Shadise Beshukan, she threw it out in the market. Amra, and she said, Hai Lamaimi Boyili, what need do I have for all of this? And that fulfilled another prediction, this one from Yechezkel. V'hainu dichsiv kaspam b'chutzosi ashlichu. The pasuk says they will throw their silver in the streets. This is all still an outgrowth of that Kamsa Bar Kamsa story. So we now read the next phase. Now that we found out that the Romans laid siege to the city as a result of Bar Kamsa's Lashon Hara, the Biryonim destroyed the storehouses. Now we get the story of an attempt by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to salvage things. Abba Sikra Reish Biryone di Yerushalayim Bar Achse de Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Hava. Abba Sikra was the head of the Biryonim. Abba Sikra was not his name. Abba is a term for a leader. Sikra is a term for the Sikari. The Sikari were, we know them from Josephus and contemporary sources, the Sikari were a group of Jewish zealots who wanted to push for rebellion against Rome. Sikra in Aramaic is what?
Long guy.
In Aramaic, Sikra is usually, it comes from this, red. Sikra is a term for the color red. In this case, it's the red of blood. So they were known indeed as the ones with the daggers who produced the red, and they were known as the Sikari. And their method, I once heard, was that they would go into a mob of people, they would stab somebody, and then they would run away. And the point was to create such pandemonium and such lack of trust, the Romans are among us somewhere, that it would lead the Jews to ultimately fight against the Romans. So their leader is Abba Sikra. One of the commentators suggested that his actual name was Ben Batiach. Ben Batiach, we know from the Mishnayos in Kalim, was somebody with an unusually large fist. It has to do with the discussion over there about the size of a hole in a kli that you want to make pure. But the point is that Egrofo Shal Ben Batiach is sort of the standard for a large fist. He's a big man, this Ben Batiach, and he is the leader of these zealots.
Like
I don't know if there's any association. So he was also the nephew of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Shalach le tabitzina legaboi. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sends a message to Abba Sikra. He says, "Come to me in secret. We have to resolve this." Asa, Abba Sikra comes to him. Amar le ad emas avdisu hachi v'katlisu leila awa bechafna. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, "You're killing us. You're killing us with famine. How long are you going to keep on doing this? You destroyed the storehouses." Amar le, Abba Sikra says to him, "Ma yavid, what can I do? Di amina lahu midi katluli. If I say anything, they're going to kill me." In other words, you think I'm the leader, right? I'm only the leader because I haven't said no to them. The day I say no to them, they'll kill me and they'll replace me with somebody else. I have no real power. Amar le, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Chazi li takanta lididi de epok." He said, "Find some way for me to get out of the city. Afshar davi atzala purta. Maybe I could save something." Amar le, so Abba Sikra says to him, "This is what you do. Nikot nafshach b'katsiri." He says, pretend that you are very ill. V'leise kule alma v'leishailu bach. Let everybody come and ask how you are. V'aisi midi sarya v'agni gabach v'lemru denach nafshach. Have them bring, or you should bring, something rotten. Keep it with you on the bed, and let people say that you've passed on. The idea is, the next piece, v'la'elu bach talmidach v'la'leo bach inish acharina. Let only your students carry you. Let nobody else carry you. So that nobody should feel that you are light. Because people know that live people are lighter than the deceased. It's easier to shift people who are alive than it is to shift people who have passed on. Anyone who's worked with a Chevra Kadisha knows what it's like to move a body. It's easier to move someone who's alive than someone who has passed on. And so that's his statement. There's an urban myth that you can actually that there's a difference in weight, and that signifies the soul having departed. But the idea here, I think, is not weight. The idea here is ease of movement. So make sure that your students are the ones who carry you, because they'll know that you're alive, but they're not going to tell anybody. Avid hachi. So that's what they did. We're on the first of the widest lines on the bottom of Nun Vav Amud Aleph. Nichnas bo Rabbi Eliezer mitzad echad, Rabbi Yeshua mitzad acher. Rabbi Eliezer on one side, Rabbi Yeshua on the other side. Kimatu lepischa, when they got to the gates of Yerushalayim, ba'u lemidkarei. The Biryonim don't want anybody getting out of the city. They're suspicious of a plan, and so they said, "Let's stab him. Let's see what happens." Amar lehu, but he said to them, he, I think, is Abba Sikra, must be the one, because he's the one who's in the know about this plot. So Abba Sikra says to them, Yomu Rabban Dakru, you can't stab him, because it's going to cause the Romans to say, look at these Jews, they stab their leaders. What's most important to the Biryonim is their pride. They don't have a hope of beating the Romans, but their pride is what matters to them. So what are you going to look like to these Romans if they see you stabbing your leader? Bo lemitchafe. So they said, all right, let's push him. As Rashi says, Ula Yitzhak, maybe he'll cry out. Amar lo yomu rabban dachfu. But the Abba Sikra said, then they're going to say, they pushed the body of their leader. This is how they treat their deceased leader. Paschule baba, they opened the gate, nafak, and he went out. Kimata lahasam, when he got there, meaning to the Roman leadership, Amar shlama alach malka, shlama alach malka. He greets the Roman leader, Vespasian. He says to him, greetings to you, O king, greetings to you, O king. So Amar le, machayvis treik tala. So Vespasian says to him, you are liable for 2 deaths. Why? Chada delav malka ana. He says, first of all, I'm not the king. and therefore you are making fun of me, or potentially what you're doing is an act of rebellion against the throne. Take your pick. The Malka, and you called me the king. Visu, and further, if I am the king, then why didn't you come to me until now? Amar lei, to which Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai replies, Dika amrit lav malka, as far as your statement that you're not the king, ivra malka at, you will be the king. How do I know that? Di'ilav malka at, because if you were not the king, lo mimsura Yerushalayim biyadach, Yerushalayim would not have been given into your hands. How do I know that? Dichsiv, because the pasuk in Yeshaya says, "V'halavanon ba'adir yipol." The Livanon will fall to the mighty one. So we now have to translate two words, Livanon and mighty. We take mighty first. Ve'ein adir ela melech. Adir, the mighty one, is a reference to a king. Dichsiv, as a pasuk in Yirmiyah says, V'aya adiro mimenu. It's the use of adir there to refer to a king. V'aya adiro mimenu moshlomi kirbo yetzei. The adir is like the moshel, is like the ruler. And as far as the word Levanon, ve'ein Levanon ela beis hamikdash. Levanon is a reference to the beis hamikdash. Shneamar, as Moshe said, Hahara tov hazeh ve'halevanon. This beautiful mountain, this great mountain, and the Levanon is the Beis Hamikdash on the mountain. The Beis Hamikdash is called Levanon perhaps because of the cedars of Lebanon that are actually used, or as Rashi says here, because it whitens the sins of the Jewish people, Levanon from Lavan, meaning white. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him, I know you have to be a king, because Yerushalayim would not fall to you if you were not a king. Parenthetically, historians note it's not clear exactly what year this is, but we know that there's a lot of tumult in the year 69 among the Romans. It was known as the four emperor year. They went through four different emperors. There's a mess. There's a coup, and there's a lot that goes on at that point. Vespasian becomes king in that year. So there's some dispute as to whether the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed in the year 68 or in the year 70, but clearly this is all going on at roughly the same time. And he says, you are going to be king. And as far as your question of, if I am the king, then why haven't you come to me until now? Until now, the Biryonim, the zealots among us, would not permit me to get out. So Amar Lei, Roman says back to him, if you had a barrel of honey and there was a snake curled around the barrel, wouldn't you break the barrel if that was what it took in order to get rid of this dangerous snake? So that's what you should have done. You should have broken down the walls of Yerushalayim in order to be able to get rid of the Biryonim. Ishtik, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai doesn't have an answer. Kari ale Rabbi Yosef, Itema Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yosef, or perhaps Rabbi Akiva said regarding this, Meishiv chachamim achor v'da'atam yisachel. The pasuk in Yeshaya, he turns the sages back, he makes them foolish. Meaning, Ibayale le'meimer le, he should have said, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai should have responded, Shaklinan etzavsa v'shaklinan le'lederakon v'katlinan le. We would rather take a stick and use that to get rid of the snake, v'katlinan le, and kill the snake, v'chavisa shavkinan la, and then we could have the barrel of honey. So similarly here, our hope was that you, the Romans, would conquer the zealots, and the city would remain intact. That was what we were hoping to have happen. Okay. That's what he should have said, but he didn't say it. We're on the first of the medium lines. Adahachi asi pristika aleme Romi. A messenger came from Rome at this point. Amar le kum demisle Caesar. He said, come, Caesar is dead. V'amri hanu chashiva de Romi lo sivach bereisha. And the aristocrats of Rome have said, you should be the new head. Well, havasayim chad misani. He was wearing one shoe, or he put on one shoe, however you take that. Ba lemisayim alachrina. He wanted to put on the other one, lo ayel, but he couldn't get the other shoe on. Ba lemishlaf aleidach. He wanted to remove the shoe that was on. Lo nafik. It wouldn't come off. Amar maihai. He said, what's going on? Amar le lo titzta'er. He said, don't worry, don't be upset. Shmua tova asyalach. You've heard good news. Dichsiv, because the pasuk in Mishlei says, Shmua Tova Tedashin Etzem. When people hear good news, it bloats their bones. So whether that's enhanced blood circulation now that you have good news, and whatever adrenaline in your system has caused better blood flow, who knows? But the bottom line is you swelled up, and now you're stuck, because you have one shoe on and one shoe off. So what do I do? Elamai takante. So what should he do? Let somebody come along who you do not like, who you do not feel comfortable with. Let him pass before you. Dichsiv, because it also says in Mishlei, a low spirit will dry out, will deflate the person, will dry out the bones. So Avad Hachi, that's what he did. Ayel, and sure enough, at that point he could get the other shoe on. Amarle said to him, if you're so wise, I'm going to remind you, why didn't you come to me until now? To which he said, I already told you why. It's the Biryonim. To which he said, yeah, and I also told you. I gave you an answer. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai once again does not respond. Amarle, Vespasian says to him, I'm going. He says, I'm leaving, and I'm going to send somebody else now as the general. So in other words, don't think the attack is over. The attack on Yerushalayim remains, the siege remains, I'm sending somebody new. However, Ella ask me for something that I will give you. Loaded words. Ask me for something that I will give you. Meaning, forget about asking for Yerushalayim, as we'll see in the Gemara itself. Amarle, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him, okay, Tain li Yavne v'chachameha. Give me Yavne and its sages. That's where the sages have gone, and that way you'll preserve the tradition, the Masorah. V'shushilta de Rabbi Gamliel, as well as the family line of Rabbi Gamliel, which represents the monarchy of the house of David HaMelech. V'asvase de Misayim le Rabbi Tzadok, and you have to cure Rabbi Tzadok. I need you to cure Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok was that important an emblem for the Jewish people that he makes it into the top 3 list that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asks for. Kari ale Rabbi Yosef. So once again, in steps Rabbi Yosef, Vitema Rabbi Akiva, or perhaps Rabbi Akiva, and says, Meishiv chachamim achor b'da'atam yisachel. Iboya lememer le lishbekinu hadazimna. He was made foolish by this Roman. He should have said, leave us alone, just this once. But he didn't ask for that, because he said, maybe he won't do that much, and the result is that I won't have gotten anything. So if I ask for too much, I'm not going to have anything at all. And I think this goes back to the theme that we already have seen. We saw it with the servant of Marta Bas Baisus, and we saw it also in our introduction, Ashrei Adam Mefachei Tamid. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai understands very well what's going on. He understands that this didn't happen in a vacuum. It's not as though one fine day, when the relations were fine between the Romans and the Jews, word got back to the king that the Jews were rebelling, and poof, this happened, and poof, you can just get rid of it. The Romans are in control, and the Romans are rabid for their control, and if this story isn't what triggers them, then the next story is going to be what triggers them. It could be that this time around, he'll manage to get the Romans to make peace. And what's going to happen tomorrow when there's another Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and somebody else says something, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai has made it clear within this Gemara that he believes that that Hashem is behind everything that's going on, and that the decision has been made to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. So I'm not you can't argue with the Gemara when it says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's reasoning was, maybe I won't even get that much. But I think part of maybe I won't get that much is, and now what's going to happen? Let me at least save those who can potentially help us to rebuild. So that's his discussion with Vespasian. Now, parenthetically, we talk about what this cure was for Rabbi Tzadok. We already made reference to it on the previous page. But Asvasa de Messiah le Rabbi Tzadok Maihi. What was the cure for Rabbi Tzadok? Yoma Kama Ashkiua Maya de Pari. The first day they gave him water that had a little bit of coarse flour soaked in it. Lamachar maya desipuka. Then the next day, whether it means the next day or the next phase, water with coarse flour and actually mixed into it. Lamachar maya de kimcha. Then water with finer flour dissolved in it. Deravach mei purta purta, until little by little his innards adjusted and he was able to take nourishment. So Azal Shadre Latitus. So Vespasian leaves and he sends Titus. Now Vespasian actually had a son, Titus. I don't know if this is the Titus who is his son, but it would be consistent, certainly. So he sends Titus, and here we quote a pasuk from Ha'azinu: "Ve'amar e Elohim tzur chasayu bo." He said, "Where is his God?" Meaning, in this case, Titus said, "Where is the God of the Jews, the rock in whom they took shelter?" Zet Titus Harasha, that's wicked Titus, Shachirev Vegidev Klape Mala, who blasphemed towards heaven. Ma also, what did Titus do? Tafas Zona Biyado, he took a Zona, a harlot, by the hand, Venichnas Lebeis Kacha Kadashim, and he went into the Holy of Holies, the place that only the Kohen Gadol goes into, and only on Yom Kippur, and only after going to Mikvah, and with the whole Avoda, and the Kataras, and everything else. V'yitzia Sefer Torah, and he spread out a Sefer Torah. V'avar Alei Avera, and he commits an Avera with the Zona on the Sefer Torah in the Kodesh Kadashim. V'natal Sayev V'gideras HaParochas, and he took a sword, and he slashed the curtain that had been in front of the Aron. Mind you, the Aron is not there, because in the second base Hamikdash you don't have an Aron. But he takes this sword and he slashes the curtain that's there. V'naz Nes, a miracle happened. Vayadam mivatzveitz v'yotze, and blood emerged from this curtain. One of the commentators, I think it was Maram Schiff, suggests that this was the blood that had been dried on the curtain from the karbanos, because you remember that in the days of the Beis Hamikdash you sprinkle blood on Yom Kippur from the karban towards the Aron. So maybe this is that blood that miraculously is rehydrated now and emerges. Ukasavur, so Titus thinks, Harages Atzmo, he thinks that he has actually done something to God. That's his vision. He thinks by slashing the paroches, blood is coming out. I must have done this to God. Shanamar, as the pasuk says, Sha'agut soarecha bekerav moadecha samu ososam osos. Your enemies, God, have roared in the midst of your moed, the place of meeting, the Beis Hamikdash, and they took their signs as signs, meaning they took this to be a sign. Abachanan Omer, mi chamocha chasin ya, mi kamocha chasin v'kashash atashomea niutza v'gidufa shal osa rasha v'shosek. We now have riffs on this idea in a couple of psukim. Abachanan said, we have a pasuk, who is like you, chasin, who is mighty, God, but he says, who is like you, who is chasin v'kasheh, mighty and tough, that you could hear the blasphemy of that wicked man and be silent. Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, they taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Mi chamocha ba'elim Hashem, which literally is who is like you, God, among the mighty ones, but Mi chamocha ba'ilmim, who is like you among those who are ilim. Ilim could mean one who is powerful. You're powerful. You're so powerful you don't even say anything. When this happens, you keep your silence. Or ilmim could be the mute, who is like you, who is mute. I think it's the Rashash who offers the other suggestion, even though mute is the common explanation. I think it's the Rashash who says it means those who are mighty, who can stand and not say anything. Ma'asa, what did Titus do at this point? We're on the fourth of the widest lines on Nunvav Amid Beis, 56b. Nadalas haparochas, he took the curtain, v'asok min gargusni, and he made it into sacks, like you used to hold things. They called Kalim Shebamikdash Veinichan Bahen, and he took all of the vessels in the Beis Hamikdash and he put them in these sacks. Voshivan Besfina Lelech Lishtabech Be'iro, and he put them on a boat to go be praised in his city for it. Shnamar, and he quotes a pasuk from Koheles. Uvechein Ra'isi V'Sha'im Kvurim Uvava'u U'Makom Kadosh Ya'alechu V'Yishtakchu Ba'ir Asher Keinasu. So the literal read of the pasuk is, I have seen the wicked buried. They come from the holy place and they are forgotten in the city for what they have done. But he reads it as Al Tikri Kivurim, not buried, Ela Kivutzim. I have seen the wicked gathered. And Al Tikri V'Yishtakchu, and it's not that they are forgotten, Ela V'Yishtabchu, they are praised. They're praised in the city, and think of the parade when they get back to Rome and the Arch of Titus, and that's what this is. Ika da amri kavurim mamish. Alternatively, it means actually buried, meaning da afilu mili de mitamra nigal yalahon, that even those things that were hidden were revealed to them. Amad alav nachshol shebayam letova. Well, he gets on the sea, and a big wave comes up to drown him on the sea. There's a big storm. Amar. So Titus says, it looks like the God of the Jews is only powerful on water. After all, Paro came along, he drowned him in the sea. Sisra, right, the general from the Philistines, in the 4th and 5th chapters of Shoftim. And he drowned Sisra in the sea as well. He doesn't even mention Noach. He wants to drown me in the sea also. Im Gibor Hu, if this God is really mighty, let him ascend onto land and fight with me there. Yatsa Baskol, a voice comes out, Va'amralo, and said to him, Rasha ben Beno shel Esav HaRasha, wicked one, son of a wicked one, grandson of wicked Esav, because remember that we trace Rome to Edom, and Edom is from Esav. So he calls him Ben Beno Shel Esav HaRasha. Of course, along the way, potentially that makes him, well, I'm not going to, it's a longer side thing. The Bria Kala Yeshli Ba'olami. I have a light creature in my world, God says. V'yitush Shema. It's called a gnat, a mosquito. Amai Karila Bria Kala. Why is it called a light creature? Dema'alana Isla Umafkana Lesla. Because it eats, but you can't notice any sort of excretion. It takes in. You can't tell that it's actually producing anything. That's how light this creature is. Alelia Basha, go up on land and fight with that first. You're such a balgaiva. You're so arrogant. Try battling the gnat. So Alelia Basha, he goes up on land. Bayitush v'nichnas b'chot mo. The gnat entered his nostrils. V'nakar b'mocho sheva shanin, and it banged away at the soft tissue inside for 7 years. We call the brain moach, but moach is generally used in the language of the Mishnah and Gemara as a reference to marrow inside bones in general. It's soft tissue. So it bangs away for 7 years. Yom Achad have a kacholif abava debei nafcha. One day, Titus is passing by a blacksmith gate. Shama kalar zavta ishtik, and there's the sound of the hammering on the anvil, and suddenly the gnat stops banging away. Amar igatakanta. Titus says, "Oh, there's something you can do. There's a cure." Kol yoma maisu nafcho machu kamei. So imagine this guy, right? The great Roman leader is sitting there. This is his cure. He's now happy because every day you can't hear yourself think in his palace because he has a blacksmith hammering away in front of him in the palace. This is his cure. So lenachri yav lei arba zuzeh. If it was a non-Jewish blacksmith, he would pay him 4 zuz. Which is a good payment. That's something that's expensive, right? You can buy a small goat for 2 zuz, tzad for 3 zuzeh, so 4 zuz is 2 goats. It's not bad payment for the day. So that's for the non-Jew. Yisrael, if it was a Jew, he would say, just be happy. It's enough for you that you got to see your enemy in this state, that his salvation is to have some blacksmith hammering away in front of him. He did that for 30 days. Mikan ve'elech, from then on, kevan didash dash. It was already used to it. The gnat was used to the sound. It was no longer distracted by it, and it went right on banging. Tanya. Amar Pinchas ben Arova. Pinchas ben Arova reported, Aniya yisi ben gedolei Romi. I was among the aristocrats in Rome. Okshemes, and when Titus died, patsu es mocho, they broke open his brain. Umatsu bo kitzipor dror mishkal shnei slayim. Here I think it is brain, in particular. But they found inside this creature that was like a tzipor dror, a wild bird, weighing 2 sela. B'masnisa tana, in a brisa they taught, kigozal ben shana mishkal shnei litrin, like a year-old dove weighing 2 liter. The idea being that the Jew is compared to the dove. Amar Abaye, Naktinan Pivshal Nachoshes Vitziparnav Shal Barzal. Abaye says Naktinan, which is a funny word for him to use, because usually when Abaye says Naktinan, Rashi jumps to say this is a word that Abaye uses when he's quoting halacha. And there's no halacha involved here. But he says its mouth, its beak was of copper, and its nails were of iron, which has all sorts of associations in Navi to the iron and the copper as the implements of punishment. So, Kiava Kamayas, when Titus knew he was dying, Amar Lahu, he said to the people around him, Likliyu Alahu Gavra, Velivdri Lakit Me'ashev Yami. He said they should burn him, they should cremate him, and scatter his ashes to the 7 seas. This way the God of the Jews should not find him and raise him up for judgment. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Elazar said, Bo re'ei kama gedola kocha shel busha. Sharisia HaKadosh Baruch Hu es bar kamtza v'hecher v'sbeisa v'sar v'seichalo. So Rabbi Elazar brings us back to where we started from. We started this whole discussion with how people were not careful and how people were not sensitive to what could result from their actions, and how bar kamtza was humiliated at the party and Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas did nothing about it, and the result was this devastating attack by the Romans, the siege of Yerushalayim, the destruction by the Zealots, who also didn't think about where things were going, and also didn't take things as seriously as they should have, and the result being the death of many in famine. And then we had finally the Roman invasion and the Acts of Titus, and all of this, Rabbi Elazar says, Bo re'ei kama gedola kocha shel busha. See how great is the power of humiliation. Sharisia HaKadosh Baruch Hu es bar kamtza. God helped bar kamtza. The hechriv es beisa v'sar v'seichalo. And he destroyed his house. He burned his mikdash, all for that. And that's all the first of the 3 stories. That's the first story, the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Brings us to the second. Yeah.
Okay, so what about the actual animal that was bought as a sacrifice? Could you have actually sacrificed that with the muma or whatever?
So to do so would have definitely been what we call hara'as sha'ah. It would have been a ruling that would have been, I guess, special dispensation is the best term in English. It would have been done just for that time, just in order to save lives. Ordinarily, you would not be allowed to do so.
Okay, and so should they or shouldn't they have?
Well, I am certainly not a bar hachi to say one way or the other, but we see Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's criticism, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him, you wouldn't speak up at the party, but you spoke up now to protest. Clearly, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai believes that one of 2 things should have happened. Either he should have spoken up at the party to save Bar Kamsa the humiliation, or he should have kept his mouth closed now and let them bring the carbon. So I think that tells you what he would have been willing to allow for.
But did they know that it came from the Caesar?
Apparently, from the conversation they did, right? Because otherwise, why would they have wanted to bring it because of Shlom Malchus? Right? The Gemara says explicitly that they did know. Yeah.
They did know.
Yeah. Yeah. The second story.
You can break laws.
Right.
Break Shabbos for
It's
nephew, so you sacrifice a moved animal for nefesh.
The argument of saving lives is certainly a valid argument. If we wanted to sit down and analyze it from a legalistic perspective, we would get down to the question of, can you identify a specific person whose life is at stake, and does it matter that this is on the Mizbeach and the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore that may supersede concerns? You could come up with all sorts of arguments, but at the end of the day, I think it does seem from the Gemara that that's what ought to have happened, is the bringing of the carbon. Atarnagola v'atarnagolta chariv tur malka. The second of our 3 stories, we said, because of a chicken and a rooster, Tur Malka was destroyed. Tur Malka, as we're going to see, is a place filled with Jewish communities. Tur in Aramaic is Har in Hebrew. Tur is Har. The Malka is king. So Tur Malka is Har HaMelech, the mountain of the king. So the custom was that when they would bring out a groom and a bride, they would bring before them a rooster and a chicken. Saying you should have many children the way that chickens do. One day, Roman forces are passing through a Jewish area. They see this wedding, they see the chicken and the rooster, and they say, we are hungry. And they take the chicken and the rooster. Naflu alayu. Well, the Jews, without being the mefached tamid, without being fearful and thinking we don't necessarily deserve a miracle from God, we should think twice before we attack the Roman soldiers. They fall upon the soldiers, they attack them. Asu Amula, the Caesar, Mardu Bach Yudoi. Well, some people must have survived the scene because they went back to the Caesar and told him the Jews have rebelled. Asu Alayu, and he invaded. Hava Behu, Hahu Bar Daroma. There was a gentleman by the name of Bar Daroma who was on the Jewish side, and he could leap a mil and kill. A mil in distance is a kilometer. So either he is a serious jumper, or this man, it means he can leap really far. But he is able to leap and kill. Shakle Keser Latageva Osvea Ara. The Caesar hears about his great success, this Bar Daroma's great success against his forces, and he takes his crown, Va'osvea Ara, and he puts it on the ground. Amar, he said, Ribone de Alma Kule, master of the entire universe. Inecholach, if it's okay with you, Lo Timsrelau Gavra Ledideu Malchusei Biyade Dechad Gavra. Don't give me and my entire kingdom into the hands of one man. Achshale Pume Bar Daroma. Bar Daroma's mouth caused him to stumble. He sinned. Ve'amar, he said, quoting a pasuk in Tehillim, Halo ata Elokim zenachtanu velo seitzei Elokim betzivosenu. You, God, have abandoned us. You do not go out with our forces. And it was a statement. It was a statement that we're doing this all on our own, and God is not helping us. To which the Gemara challenges and says, oh, wait a minute, what's wrong? He quoted a pasuk in Tehillim. David Nami Yamar Hachi. David said it. Yeah, but David Asmui Kamasma. David was expressing shock. He was saying, God, are you not with us? Whereas Bar Daroma was saying, God isn't with us, we're doing it all ourselves. So, Al Lebeis Hakise, he went into the washroom. Asa Darkona, a snake came along. Shamti Lekirkeshe V'nach Nafshe. It bit him, and he died. The Darkona is a term that we often use for Avodah Zarah, for idolatry. It's a Gemara that's used in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah about idolatry, and I sort of wonder, because the Gemara links arrogance and idolatry, and I wonder if that isn't a message here. He became so arrogant, and he got punished via this, because he was really idolizing himself. In his statements, but he was vulnerable, and God said, "I'm not going to protect him," and he died. Omar, so the Caesar says, since a miracle happened for me, hazimna, just this once, ish bekinu, I'll leave them alone. Shavkinu va'azal, and so the forces left. Izdakar, and the Jews celebrated. Va'achlu v'shasu, they ate and drank. Va'adliku shrage, and they lit candles. Ad ischazi bilyona de gushpanka barachok mila. It was so bright that you could see the seal on your ring, even if you were a kilometer away from the city, based on the light coming from that city. So in other words, you're standing in the dark, and you look at the seal on your ring, you could actually make out details by light that's coming from a kilometer away. There was that much light emerging from the city. Omar, well, the Caesar says, Mechta kachadu biyudai. The Jews are mocking me. They think they drove me off, and that they've beaten me. Hadar asalayu, and so he came back and continued the invasion. Now, what do we know about Turmalka? So Amar Rabbi Asi said, Tlas mea alfe shlife saifa ailu Turmalka. Rabbi Asi said 300,000 swordsmen entered Turmalka. Vikatlu bat tlasa yome utlasa lelvasa. They killed people for 3 days and 3 nights. On the other side, there were parties going on, and no one on one side knew what was going on the other side. They now quote a pasuk from Eicha. Bala Hashem v'lo chamal is kol ne'os Yaakov. Hashem swallowed up. He did not have mercy on all the beautiful ones of Yaakov. Ki asa Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan said, you know what that's talking about when the pasuk says Hashem did not have mercy on the beautiful ones of Yaakov? Elu shishim ribo ayaros shahayu lo liyanai hamelech bahar hamelech. It's a reference to the 600,000 cities that Yanai had on Har Hamelech, Turmalka. Dam Rav Yehuda Rav Asi, because Rav Yehuda said, citing Rav Asi, Shishim Ribo Ayaras Hayu lo liyanai hamelech bahar hamelech. That Yanai had 600,000 cities on this mountain. Each one had within it as many as those who had left Egypt. meaning 600,000. We're assuming the men of military age, the 600,000. Chutz mishalosh, except for 3, shayu ben kiflayim kiyotze Mitzrayim, which had double that. Eiluein, and these are the 3 cities. Kfar Bish, which literally means city of the bad. Kfar Shichlayim, the city of cress, C-R-E-S-S, like watercress. And Kfar Dichraya, the city of the males. What do you mean? Kfar Bish, the city of the bad. They would not give a house to a guest, meaning they wouldn't let anybody stay anywhere, so they became known as the bad city. Kfar Shichlayim, the city of the crest. Shaisa Parnasasan min Shichlayim. They made their living off of Shichlayim, off of crest. The Rishalmi says that they grew among themselves like cress, which grows quickly. Kfar Dichraya, and then you have the city of the males. What was that? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shayu Neshosei and Yodos Zacharim Tchila V'Yodos Nekeva B'Achrona Uposkos. They would give birth to a boy first, then they would give birth to a girl, and that was it. They wouldn't have any more children. The Yerushalmi on this says that they only gave birth to boys. They didn't have any girls, so much so that people had to leave the city in order to have a baby girl, so that they'd have somebody to marry, so their kids would have somebody to marry. So that's the story of this Tur Malka. So Ula says, what are you talking about? Amar Ula, L'didi chazi li'ahu asra. He says, I've seen Tur Malka. Va'afilu shisin rib vasakani lo machzik. It can't even hold 600,000 reeds. He told me 600,000 cities, and in each city 600,000 people, and in 3 other cities you have 1.2 million people. He says, what are you talking about? Amar le'autz duki l'Rabbi Chanina. So a Sadducee seized on this, and he said to Rabbi Chanina, Shakri mishakrisu, see, you're liars, your whole thing, you're all liars. Amar le', to which Rabbi Chanina said, not so fast. Eretz tzvi k'siv ba. It says, near me, regarding Israel, it is Eretz tzvi, which literally you could render as the land of desire, the land of Hashem's desire. Tzvi is a reference to desire. However, he takes it tzvi as the deer. Just like the hide of a deer. When you remove it from the deer, it shrivels, and you can no longer actually contain the flesh of the deer. Af Eretz Yisrael, so to Israel. Bisman sheyoshvin ala Ravcha, when the Jews live there, then it swells up. Bisman sheyoshvin ala Gamda, when they're not there, it shrivels up. So he says at one point it really could hold this many people, and he says you should take it. He says you should take the numbers literally. Okay. Rav Manyumi bar Chilkiya, Rav Chilkiya bar Tuvia, Rav Huna bar Chia, Abba Yasa Gabi Adadi. 3 sages, Rav Manyumi bar Chilkiya, Rav Chilkiya bar Tuvia, and Rav Huna bar Chia, are sitting together. Amri, and they said, I'ika deshmiya le milsa mikfar sachanya shel Mitzrayim lema. If any of you have heard anything from Kfar Sachnia or Kfar Sachania of Mitzrayim, you should say so. There's some debate as to whether Kfar Sachnia was actually in Mitzrayim or whether this is an altered edition, because there is a Kfar Sachnia we find identified in the Gemara with Notzrim, with Christians in it, and the idea that Christianity had taken hold there. So it might not be Mitzrayim. Sorry?
Isn't it Sachnin?
Right, so Sachnin, if you take that, then it's Sachnin, yes. So this didn't have to be necessarily Mitzrayim, but in any case, this was apparently a community that was leveled by the Romans. So he says, if you know anything about this city, what were they like? What were the people there like? Were they righteous, not righteous? Say so. So one of them began and said, once a young man and woman, maybe they weren't young, a man and woman who were already Mikudash, they were already Mikudash one to the other. They had already gone through Kiddushin. So they've gone through the first stage of marriage. They were taken captive by the idolaters, who tried to marry them to each other. That was a standard practice. You marry off the captives, and then they produce baby captives, and so you get your population of slaves. Amralo, and the woman said to the man, B'vakasha mimcha al tigabi, please don't touch me. She'en li ksuba mimcha, because I don't have a ksuba from you. And the rule is, without a ksuba, you can't get married. So, v'lo nagaba, he did not touch her, ad yom moso, until the day he died. Ugshemes, and when he died, Amr lahen, she said to them, whoever them are is not clear, Siptu lazeh, eulogize this one, Shapit peit beyitzro yoser mi Yosef. He mocked his Yetzer Hara more than Yosef did. in the incident with Potiphera. Dilu Yosef lohava ela chadashaita. Yosef was tested that once. V'hai kol yoma v'yoma. He was tested daily. Even though in the original story we find that she spoke to Yosef day after day, but there's that one moment that's recorded in the Torah that Yosef was tested. He was tested daily. V'ilu Yosef lav b'chadamita. Yosef was not in the same bed. V'hai b'chadamita. For us, they made us stay in the same bed. V'ilu Yosef lav ishto. And Yosef, she wasn't his wife. V'ha ishto. I am technically his wife, and yet he stayed away. So that's one story about the people there, and it's designed to say the people are that type, that they have that level of righteousness. Pasach idach va'omar. The second one spoke up and said, Maise va'amdu arba'im modios b'dinar. At one point, there was the measure of 40. It was the measure of 40 modios. 40 measures of grain could be bought for a dinar. That was the going rate. Nechsar hashar modia achas. The gate, meaning the going rate, for grain dropped 1 modia. So in other words, grain became more expensive. Now you couldn't get 40 for a dinar, you can only get 39 for a dinar. So it's a minimal change, right? It's not a huge change, 2.5%. But enough of a change that they were sensitive to it and said, we must have done something wrong if grain has gone up in price. And boy, what they found. They found a father and son who had been with a girl who was engaged to somebody, betrothed, already had undergone Kiddushin, and on Yom Kippur. They brought them to Beis Din, and they killed them. And then that was apparently the correction of the one sin that was in the city, because everything went back to normal. You read the story, I don't know about you, I read that story, and I don't understand what I'm reading. Because on the one hand, it's a city that's so sensitive that immediately they know something must be wrong. And they go investigate, and they immediately find what it was that was wrong. They're such righteous people, and then on the other hand, the one sin that's going on in the city is not like, someone doesn't say Shema on time one morning. It's Avu Bno, the father and the son, with this woman who's in Arma Arasa on Yom Kippur. I throw up my hands. I don't know what to make of this. If anyone can enlighten me, please.
As the level of righteousness goes up, is the bar going up too at the same time?
Meaning?
The higher up the level of righteousness, the higher the standard?
Well, the standard here, though, is, this is down through the earth. This is a sin that one would hope, occurs, if it has to occur once in the history of the world, it occurred once in the history of the world. But we would not ever, in our wildest dreams, imagine, although you give me an idea, and maybe this is what's going on, and maybe this is actually what you meant. Also, I don't know. But we talk about the fact that Abaye mentions it in the Gemara in Ksuvos, Rava mentions it to Abaye in the Gemara in Ksuvos, that when someone is greater, they have a greater Yetzer Hara. That's what you were going for. Mm-hmm. They have a greater Yetzer Hara, a greater drive to sin. If a person doesn't have great drives, he's never going to accomplish great things. So maybe what it's saying here is that the people there were so great, and one time those fell, and look what they fell into, and that also shows how great the rest of them were. Maybe.
I was thinking then the first story you might come to say, well, maybe he didn't have such a taiva for such a thing, and that was the whole situation in that city. Then you see they did have a big Yetzer Hara for that, because you could see what could happen. So they were that stark because they were fighting the big Yetzer Hara.
Right. This could have been any one of them, and they didn't do it. And I hear it. Okay. So that's our second story from Kfar Sachnia, and then we get our third. The Pasach v'idach, the third one began. And he said, "Ma'isa ba'adam echad shnasan einav bi'ishto legarsha." There was a man who decided he wanted to divorce his wife. V'isa ksuba samaruba, but he couldn't afford the ksuba money that he would owe. Ma'asa, what did he do? Halach v'zimenes shushvinav. He came up with a plot. He invited his best friends. Shushvinin doesn't just mean best friends. It might mean that here, but generally in the Gemara, when you see Shushvin, it's a technical term. They had a setup in which people who were in a circle of friends would invite each other to their weddings, and the others would bring gifts. And the rule was, if someone made you a shushvin for his wedding, you had to make him a shushvin for your wedding. So this was actually a technical obligation. It was a close circle of people who would celebrate with each other. So this man invites his shushvinin, his closest of close friends. V'he'echilon, he gave them food to eat. V'hishkan, he gave them to drink. Shichron, he got them drunk. V'shkivan al mita achas, and he had them all lie down on a bed. V'hevi loven beitza v'hitel beinein, and he brought egg white, and I think that he means from a raw egg probably, but he brought that and he put it among them. V'hemid lahen edim, and he set up witnesses, and the point is his wife is there as well. And he sets up witnesses to see this scene. Ubala Beis Din, and he comes to Beis Din wanting to accuse his wife of infidelity. Hayasham Zakein Echad Mitalmidei Shammai Hazakein, Ubava Ben Buta Shemo. One of the elders from the yeshiva of Shammai was there. His name was Bava Ben Buta. Amarla, and he said to them, Kach mekublani mi Shammai Hazakein. This is my tradition from Shammai Hazakein. Loven beitza soleid min ha'ur. That this, if it's from egg, will in fact be burned by the fire. Meaning, if you expose this material to the heat of a flame, the material on it will burn. V'shichva zera docha min ha'ur. Whereas if it's seed, then it will be absorbed. Badku umatzu kidvarav. They investigated and found that was in fact true. This was so. So they brought the man to Beis Din. They whipped him and they collected the ksuba from him. So once again, this is a story showing really degradation, really awful character. But again, you could say it's meant to show how great the rest of them were. So Amar le Abaye le Rabbi Yosef. Abaye says something very perplexing to Rabbi Yosef. If they were so righteous, then why were they punished? How did they get destroyed? How is it that they got destroyed if they were so wonderful? These people in Kfar. So Amar Le Mishum Delawi Abal al Yerushalayim. His answer was because they didn't mourn for Yerushalayim. The Chsiv, as the pasuk says, Simchu es Yerushalayim v'gilu b'kala aveh sisu itamasos kala misabelim aleha. Be joyous with Yerushalayim, all who love her. Rejoice with her, all who mourn for her. If you saw my article in the YU to go, so you saw I had a discussion there about this Kfar Sachnia, what it means that they didn't mourn for Yerushalayim. How could you not mourn for Yerushalayim? How could you not mourn at the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? I mean, today, it's one thing. You have a hard time imagining it. But how could people who lived then not mourn the massacre, the loss of the Karbanos? How could that not have meant something to them? And so I gave 3 answers in that article, which you can probably find floating around, but one that I'll mention specifically, because I find it very strong as an explanation, comes from Rav Shlomo Kluger, not the original Rav Shlomo Kluger, the Rav of Brod, but his grandson, who was also named Rav Shlomo Kluger, in a eulogy that he gave after losing his parents. He talked about the fact that the Gemara is filled with explanations. We've even seen some of them already, for why the Jews suffered, why they were punished. And if you open up Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud Ches, Kuf Yud Tes, you get a whole litany of explanations for what they were doing wrong and how they were doing this wrong and that wrong. The Gemara in Yuma Daf Tes is the famous one, Sinas Chinam, another one that they demanded letter of the law and they wouldn't go beyond for other people, and they didn't say Berachas HaTorah, and they didn't this and they didn't that. And the danger is that when you start to assign explanations for why people are suffering, you stop seeing it as suffering and start to see it instead as divine justice. And when that happens, that's a terrible, terrible thing, because you stop sympathizing. You stop really feeling it, and you don't really mourn, because why should I mourn? He had what was coming to him. And that's the end result, as he put it there, and I quoted it in the article. You could see the wording there. I don't have it in front of me, but that's all right. Thank you. But as he put it in his piece, you can actually find it online. You can find the full text at HebrewBooks.org. You can find his essay. I may even have put a link in the article. Did I put a link in there on the footnote? I think I should have. No. Hi, it's there. It's online though. But in any case, what he said there was that we are certainly expected to find divine justice and to acknowledge divine justice when we suffer. Right? If something happens to me, God forbid, I am expected to find some way to come to terms with what God did to me and say, that's justice because I did whatever it was and I need to improve. But God forbid for me to go to somebody else and say, you're suffering because you did X, and you should come to recognize that it's from God. But that's unfortunately the downside of finding reason for and meaning in Churban, is that it tempts people to that sort of a callousness. And maybe that's what happens. They're so righteous. They're on a wonderful level, the people of Kfar Sachnia. But that's a weakness.
Well, the contrast seems to be, according to Mishlei, Mafaked Tamid as opposed to Makshalibo. It doesn't say, it says that Makshalibo is Yibol Bara. It doesn't mean that they are sinners to begin with. It just means that there's like a Lev Evan and a Lev Basar. Someone has a soft heart, and it doesn't seem like this Tormalka. They're very, very stark, but so stark that they.
Well, Yibol Ra, I think Ra in that sentence isn't Ra to do bad things. Ra means bad things will happen to them.
Which is what happened to Tormalka, because they were Makshalibo. They were very, very from, but in such a stark way. It was like, you see the examples that they bring here, it's not a nice kind of frumkeit necessarily. So.
I mean, the examples that we have are limited, but yes. But Makshalibo, yes, it definitely fits the Makshalibo, the one who hardens his heart. Yes.
Are you suggesting that things happen and there's a reason for it? We should look at it for ourselves, but we can't even assume what would be the reason for someone else.
That's correct.
But asking them that question, would that be cruel or helpful?
I think cruel. I think it's cruel to go to somebody who's suffering and say to him, think about why you're suffering. Maybe there's a reason for it. And the Gemara does have events like that. So I can't say that it should never be done, but boy, does it require extreme care. It's not simple and straightforward. I'll give you an example. The Gemara in the beginning of Brachos talks about Rav Huna, and this is not a scale. This is financial tragedy rather than life and death, but it's serious financial tragedy. Rav Huna has 400 barrels of wine go bad all at once, and the sages go in to visit him to see how he's doing because he's wiped out. Rav Huna says to them, if anyone knows anything I've done wrong, he should tell me. And they only volunteer the information that they have on him after he says that. So there is the assumption of, what he's done is because of this, but no one is actually going to put words to it until he asks them to say what they know about him. There's a hesitation, there. You have to let the other person take the lead. I think it's very situational, but I would be very afraid of volunteering this to somebody, volunteering to someone, hey, let's look at what you've done. I think it's a scary prospect.
So once he asks them, he puts them in the role of a teacher.
Yeah. Yes. And at that point, it's safe. Continuing here, because we have to finish the third story, and then we'll figure out what we're doing. But it's already 4:30. I don't want to hold people past their ability to stay. The third story of the three, Ashaka de Rispak Charuv Beitar. Beitar was destroyed because of the axle or the door on a wagon. Dehavonehigi, their custom was, Kavamisyalid Yanuka Shasli Arza, Yanukta Shasli Taranisa. Their practice was that when a baby boy was born, they would plant a cedar tree. A baby girl was born, they would plant Taranisa, which is another type of a cedar. And when a boy would marry a girl, they would cut down their respective trees, and they would make a chuppah. Yom Achad have a kachalpa brate de Caesar. One day, the Caesar's daughter was traveling by, and idbar shaka de rispak, either the door or the axle on the wagon, broke. Katsu arza va'ailula. They took a tree. They chopped down a tree, which was somebody's tree, and used it. Asu nafal alayhu, the Jews attacked them. Again, that's the one who isn't mefacheh. They weren't afraid of what could happen. Machunu, and they wiped them out, or they didn't wipe them out completely, because Asu amru leila Caesar mardu bach Yudoi. They told the Caesar the Jews are rebelling, and Asa alayu, and then the attack came. And the next piece of Gemara is going to go through what happened to the people in the invasion of Beitar. But I think I'm going to stop with. I'll stop with that, I think. Okay. God willing, this should be the last year we have to do this. We can always learn it, but it's not as personal when it's not Tisha B'Av.